Okay, cool. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming out to the workshop. This is Using AI to Help Wildlife. I'm Anthony. I'm an ex-coordinator here. I'll give an introduction in a second. But I was a coordinator last semester and plenty of other semesters for AI at UCF. So now I've since graduated. I don't do any work with AI in my day job. I decided I don't want to take that route. But I do some other NLP work that we'll kind of cover. So this workshop is mainly going to be exploring some computer vision stuff. So there's a lot that you can do to help AI and wildlife. This workshop is primarily focusing on computer vision, but we'll go over some of the other applications that exist once we get through it. There's also going to be some interactivity in the workshop. So as we go through, I might ask you all to write in chat and some of your answers. You can also speak up if you want to use your mic. Just know that the workshop is recorded and will be shared publicly. So if you don't want your voice to be shared publicly on YouTube, even though the videos don't get much views, just warning out there. You can write in chat, and no one will ever know your voice. So a little bit about me. I'm now a software engineer over at Microsoft. I volunteer as an NLP developer. So NLP, for those of you unfamiliar, is natural language processing. It's a subfield of AI that deals with text and human language. Over at Climate Mind, which is a volunteer, like a climate change project. Pretty cool. I can drop in the link in just a second. It's a really neat project, and I could talk more about that later. UCF alum, obviously, that's why I have a job. If you're not already in the UCF AI Discord, please join with the link right there. So it's a great place to be. Very small community, and we chat often about AI, and you can get to know some of the other alums and members. It's good networking too. We have a lot of alums and members at lots of different companies, and also a lot of different graduate schools. So here's the agenda. I'm going to talk about where you can find the code. I'm going to talk about some of the problems that wildlife face, how AI can solve them. We're going to go over a few real life applications. Then we're going to go over the code. So just as another warning, the workshop's going to be recorded. We've had people in the past uncomfortable with that, and they already spoke. So we just want to make sure you know that. If you don't want your voice to be shared, just type in your answers. So this link doesn't work. I couldn't get it working in time, but I'll go ahead and drop the link for this. So if you want to look at the code, here it is right there. That's the code for the app and everything. I'll be going over that in a second, and I'll go ahead and share the Jupyter notebook. I'll use Colab. So this link can view. So if you want to look at the code before I go over it, or just for your future reference, I'll also drop these links over in the Discord after the talk is done. So don't worry about missing any links from the Zoom chat. So can you still see my screen? I'm going to assume the silence is a yes. So, yep. I'm going to assume y'all know some Python. If not, Python's pretty easy to pick up, and we definitely have some courses and some workshops covering Python, and we can introduce some introductory Python resources after the talk. This is a high-level overview, so if you're new to machine learning, if you're new to AI, don't worry. We're going to go over the stuff. It's not going to get super in the weeds. There's no math on any of the slides, and if you ever want to get more into machine learning, want to get more into the theory and everything behind it, we have plenty of workshops for that as well, and entire groups of AI at UCF for that. We're using PyTorch as our deep learning framework, and we're going to be deploying the model using Flask, which is a Python web API framework, or just Python web framework. So let's cover the problems that wildlife face today. It's pretty bleak. Well, not that much. We'll cover it in a second, but mostly pretty bleak. So more than 1/4 of the plant and animal species on Earth are threatened because of human activity across the world. Certain places are kind of worse than others. And animals have a big importance to our economy. $14 billion in revenue alone is generated just by pollinators. Think about what other things animals do. We fish, we farm. Also, farmed animals are no risk of going extinct. But the feed we need to feed the farm animals is made by pollinators. Those are crops we need to grow. So if something happens to the pollinators on the planet, that's going to put our entire food system at jeopardy. It's a pretty daunting implication. And in the past 40 years alone, have we seen the increased human activity throughout the world? There's been a 60% decline in animal populations across the globe. And I can share sources for all these figures after the talk. So this is pretty bleak. This is pretty scary. We're going to start off in a bad mood, and it's going to go up from here. So sorry about that. But there's things we can do to help the wildlife around us, and there's things that us as technologists can do and us as practitioners of AI, and we'll go over that. So some of the things that we've done already is the Endangered Species Act. You've probably heard of it before. It's a great piece of legislation that's helped protect a lot of animal populations here in the United States. So animals like the bald eagle, and if you probably didn't think the bald eagle was once threatened, it was. And things like the manatee here in Florida, they had really low population numbers at one point, and luckily we were able to protect them and protect their habitats and bring those populations back up. Sadly, there's no gorillas in America, but gorillas in other parts of the world, especially Asia and Africa, we were able to protect their habitats and bring those numbers back up. It's still pretty low. You know, gorillas, we share a common ancestor, so they have a very long mating cycle from my knowledge. I'm not a primatologist. I might be getting that wrong. But there's still a lot we can do to help bring the gorilla populations up, and we'll go over that. So, forgot a little slide there. Oopsie. So we're going to do a little computer vision terminology and machine learning terminology. The tasks we're going to be showing today, so we're going to be writing a model that can detect images of animals. So it gives an image of an Arctic fox. It can tell you if it's an Arctic fox, an orangutan, an elephant, stuff like that. It's a really straightforward computer vision task. Maybe some more experienced practitioners might be like, I make those types of models in my sleep. Don't worry, we're going to cover some other cool, complicated stuff and applications as well. But for those uninitiated, the thing we're doing is called supervised learning. So supervised learning, essentially all that it is you give a model pictures of, let's say, snails right here, and you tell it, here's a bunch of pictures of snails. Here's a bunch of pictures of cars. Tell the difference between snails and cars. And the model, depending on what type of model architecture you're using, it'll do a bunch of stuff in the background to figure out those differences. We're using neural networks. So neural networks are a poor abstraction of the brain, but that's essentially what they're supposed to be doing, is they mimic how the neurons in your brain fire and wire together. That was their initial inspiration, but a lot of cognitive scientists and neurologists will be like, neural networks are not the brain at all. So I'm just throwing that warning out there for you. So we're going to go over a real life application, and we are moving a little bit fast. This is not a long presentation. Some of the other stuff we'll go over is a little bit longer, so I wanted to give more time for the code. So if you're lost at any point, feel free to ask a question in the chat. It also gives me a water break because I do talk really fast. Try not to talk as fast. But if you have any questions, please drop them in the chat, and I'm happy to answer them as we go through. So one of real cool application of using AI to protect wildlife is called Wildbook. So we can actually just go to it right now. Wildbook. So I was visiting it earlier. So Wildbook is this, it's really neat. I learned about this at SharkCon, which is a conference all about sharks, about like 2 years ago in 2018. I think they're having their SharkCon this summer. Essentially what it is there's two ways to submit like a picture, like they're using whale sharks for this example, but Wildbook also does zebras and other endangered species. Is you either submit a picture of a whale shark that you caught, like let's say you're on vacation or you're off one of the coast of Florida diving, because you can find whale sharks off the coast of Florida, especially if you're a diver out at sea. You take a picture of the whale shark, you send it over to them, and they use machine learning to kind of detect the unique patterns. So just like our fingerprints, whale sharks have unique patterns across their body that's unique to every single individual within whale sharks. And they use machine learning to kind of identify what, like, fingerprint that animal. So let's say this one's Wilma, and let's say you take a picture off the coast of Florida of Wilma. Cool, we know Wilma was off of West Palm Beach. Then let's say your cousin goes on vacation in Thailand and takes a picture of a whale shark, let's say months later, and it's identified as Wilma again because he took a picture, submitted it to Wildbook, and now we can get a picture of where Wilma, so we know Wilma was West Palm Beach, months later Wilma was in Thailand, so we know that Wilma like migrated over there. And this lets us track populations of whale sharks. We know that Wilma's still alive months later. We know how many whale sharks there might be because we've identified this many out there, and it helps, we know what areas it might be found, so we can help protect and conserve those areas and habitats for whale sharks. Whale sharks are just an example. Zebras, tigers, the same kind of thing applies there. Another cool thing that Wildbook does that's a lot cooler than just taking a photo and fingerprinting an animal. Let's see if I can see it on here. If not, I'm happy to describe it. But what Wildbook does is it actually does, it'll crawl videos on, like if you go to YouTube, I'm embarrassed to show my YouTube history, but we'll do it. Whale shark. So if you look up whale shark on YouTube, and whenever a new video of a whale shark is uploaded, Wildbook has bots that are kind of crawling for new uploads. And if we filter for, let's say, last hour. So someone, oh, this is great stuff. So let's say someone uploaded a video of a whale shark and not of a plastic toys and a gorilla. Wildbook would go through that video, take out screenshots from that video, and use that to try to identify any whale sharks that it might have in its database. Or it might identify a completely new whale shark. It might find Wilma's cousin, Velma. And so after it's found Velma, it'll use the source, so the metadata from that video, where was it uploaded. Sometimes it'll tell you the videos. If you take a video on your iPhone, there might be some geographic metadata associated with that upload. So it tries to grab metadata from the video upload and use that to determine where Wilma was spotted. If there's no metadata found, it will leave a comment on that YouTube video and be like, hey, uploader, let's say Mr. No Scope Fortnite 420, where did you find this whale shark? And it'll be like, I found it on vacation in Thailand. And it uses natural language processing to be like, okay, it's not like a human is reviewing that response. It's a bot that asks the question. And it's like, okay, I asked a question about location and the user responded with Thailand. So that's another cool thing that you could do with AI, not just computer vision. You can kind of use it to ask questions of people and get answers. And if you can combine these in interesting ways, you can get this as interesting databases of sightings of endangered species. So if there's any questions about that, please ask. I thought Wildbook was really neat when I first heard about it, so I'm happy to answer more. I'm not affiliated with Wildbook or anything. I just think it's cool. So another bunch of other projects I want to show off is AI for Earth. I'm going to talk about AI for Earth later, but it's a program that Microsoft runs, and it gives basically anybody who wants to do a project that's related to help conserving or protecting the planet, whether that's wildlife or agriculture or land, you submit a grant to Microsoft, a grant request, and they'll give you like Azure credits and a certain amount of funds, Azure funds, to help you realize your project. So if you want to look at other cool projects that you liked how this sounds, there's a lot of other cool ones. So conservation metrics is one that uses a bunch of like just tabular data. So like biologists often do wildlife surveys and they have all this data they collect and it's kind of hard to make sense of the data. AI can help us find insights in the data that might take months for a human to do. AI can probably do it in a matter of hours. So sorry, I'm burping. Projects like conservation metrics can help. I'm going to drop this link in the chat in case you want to look at some of the other programs here. So projects like conservation metrics can help make sense of that data and pull together data from a bunch of different wildlife surveys and kind of find trends before humans might be able to find them. And might be able to say, hey, look, a bunch of elephants in this part of Africa, their population is declining. Maybe we should go check that out. Or their population is increasing. Let's see what's going right there. Stuff like that. Another cool one is iNaturalist. So this is an app you can download on your phone, and you can kind of take pictures of wildlife as you go about your day. If you're going to a nearby park or a nearby trail, you find a cool bird, take a picture of it, you upload it to their servers, and you can help keep track of bird populations or animal populations in your area. And iNaturalist pairs up with biologists to kind of go through and sift that data, and it uses for population counting and stuff like that. There's another really cool project. I believe it's by Peace Parks Foundation. I just learned about this. I might be getting the name wrong. Let's see. I think this is it, yes. So there's another really cool project that essentially helps combat poaching. And what it does is that either I know one of the projects, it might not be from Peace Parks, but they'll strap like old cell phones to trees. And the old cell phones will be listening, and they run a little model locally. I think they're uploading data to a nearby server, and it's recording the sound, and it's trying to detect the sound of chainsaws in the area. So that's why you know there's illegal deforestation going on. And if illegal deforestation probably means you're damaging the habitat of the wildlife. It can also mean that poachers are nearby. They're trying to make a clearing to hunt some wildlife. So there's a lot of cool areas besides computer vision that you can use to kind of protect the natural world. So sound is another cool one. And there's actually, you can even use computer vision techniques to kind of detect like sound waves. So you map the sound waves out, you get a little visual of it, and then you can use that. There's a bunch of cool stuff you can do. You can learn it all at AI at UCF, but we're doing a high level overview today. So this is the kind of question I want to pose for the chat. So I kind of did a lightning round of everything here. What are some cool projects you think you can protect wildlife? Maybe from your own personal experience. Maybe you want to just shoot one out there. So if you have any ideas, write them in the chat. There's going to be a little exercise we do with those ideas afterwards. Not an exercise, but something similar. So it's also a water break for myself. Nick, you might want to mute yourself in case your clicky clack comes through.
Sorry.
Yeah, you're good. So I'll give a hint. This is ideally supposed to spur some hackathon ideas. So last fall, AI at UCF, we hosted a kind of climate change related track. So AI for Earth, essentially track at Night Hacks 2020. And the winning team, their project was essentially iNaturalist. So they made a project, they made a little mobile app and that lets you take photos of animals and and put a location in a database. Essentially was iNaturalist, and they were the winning team there. So if you want a good hackathon project, so Brett has a good one, hunting wildlife camera with motion detection and object detection to classify the animals that may walk up to it. Yep. So object detection, I was hoping someone would bring that up because I didn't kind of mention that on purpose. Object detection, especially motion traps, that's a really popular one for wildlife. It's used, there's a project, I don't remember the name right now, but they use motion cameras and they use object detection to determine the population of Arctic leopards, I'm pretty sure. I heard about this on a Microsoft Research podcast episode. I don't remember, the project's escaping me right now, but they essentially use object detection to count animal populations in an area. So the motion camera will take a photo and they'll then upload that photo to a database, and a model will try to see if there was anything in that photo. Was there any animals? And it'll do stuff similar to Wildbook, where it'll make sure not to count the same animal twice, because if an animal walks by a motion camera trap more than once, you don't want to count that as two different animals. But yeah, there's interesting projects also like that for counting animal populations in a forest where it might be difficult for humans to find it. So that's other ways AI can help. So any questions before we jump into the code? So there's been a lot thrown at you right now, especially a lot of real life use cases. So I'm going to move on anyways. You can keep typing your questions, and I think we'll pause and I'll answer them if there's any questions in the chat. So like I mentioned earlier, we're going to be using PyTorch. And I found this cool tool the other day. It's called Train Generator. So if you're familiar with writing machine learning code, you might be tired of always writing the same thing. I don't know how many people here have got into the part of Intro to C or later about functions. So essentially functions are letting you write reusable pieces of code. So if you have a function for, let's say, adding two numbers together and then multiplying by 2, you don't want to keep writing that every time you need to use it. So you just write a function to kind of simplify your life. A step above functions, in a way, is code generation. So this is something you kind of never really learn at UCF, but code generation is often used in industry to kind of map out tasks that you're going to do over and over again. Code generation is commonly found in like databases and backends, especially for stuff like object relational mappers, which is outside of the scope of this talk. This is an AI club, not a web dev club. But if you ever want to learn more about code generation, that's a common area to find it. So this is a really neat tool. I'm going to drop the link in the chat. You can definitely check it out, play with it some more. But essentially this lets you generate, like if you're new to AI and ML, it's really intimidating to kind of write all this code from scratch. it's probably a good exercise, but it's also helpful to have a guideline to do it. So what this does is we're going to do an image classification task. We're using PyTorch. You can also use scikit-learn, which is another machine learning framework. You can use a pre-trained model. This is known as transfer learning, or you're using a pre-trained architecture. It's really common. For the example I think I used ResNet 34, and we're going to do 5 classes. And we used a pre-trained model. And then the image file. So you can kind of mess around with this. I really highly encourage you to do this. If you're going to do a hackathon in the coming months, use this as a tool to bootstrap your hackathon code. It's a great tool. It's really useful. So I already trained the model beforehand. Like I mentioned, I have the Colab notebook over here. So I already went ahead and trained the model, and we'll do a high-level overview for those of us who are probably new to ML. And we'll go a little quickly because I know there's also some experienced practitioners here, so we'll try to find that balance. So if you're new to Python, we're just importing a bunch of libraries that we need, and we're just specifying where our data is located on your file system, and then we're just defining some hyperparameters. So this is our learning rate. This is how quickly our model is going to learn or unlearn something. This is epochs, so the amount of times that we're going to train the model. So just amount of training cycles. And batch size. Batch size, you only need to know if you need to mess with your GPU memory or something along those lines. Don't worry too much about batch size. You'll be messing around that plenty if you do any more work. And this is some other stuff to help with the development. So one important thing here, and I'm going to ask you a question about it later, so remember this, is we're going to be resizing our images. So we're going to now go to images, the data we're using. So if you remember earlier, we're using a supervised learning task. So it means we need labeled examples for the class, for the task we're using. I went on Kaggle. I just looked up a quick animals data set, one that was like a nice amount of classes, and I went ahead and found this. So this is just 5 different animal species. I went ahead and already trained the model on these. So, and what we're going to do for each of them is we're going to just resize them. We're going to crop them a bit, and then you turn them into a tensor for your machine learning model. This is important, so remember this. When we get to deploying the model, I'll ask you why we need this. So then this is just a bunch of other boilerplate code. We're going to make our model. It's ResNet 50. ResNet is trained on something known as ImageNet, which is a task. I believe ImageNet is a task that like you train a model to predict over 1,000 different classes. So for our toy example, we're predicting 5 different classes or labels. In real life use cases, you'll see that number in the thousands, especially if you're working with wildlife. There's like about 8 million species on this planet, probably more if you count bacteria, an insane amount. So yeah. So yeah, we're going to just go ahead and train the model. The model I trained ended up doing pretty poorly. So if you want something to take out of this workshop, if you want to like, okay, I learned all this stuff, but I actually want to improve and practice my skills as like an ML engineer, take my code and make it better. There's a lot of things I didn't do. I didn't do a validation set. If you don't know what a validation set is, go ahead and ask in the AI UCF Discord. We can help you get set up. We can help you teach you what a validation set is. What is the importance of it? I don't have a test set here either. There's probably the transformations I'm doing to the image. So I'm changing it to 256 by 256. That might be a bad idea. Maybe you can mess around with that. See how you can make this model do better. Because I think the final accuracy on just the training set, so it's not a true picture of the accuracy, was only 75%. That's pretty bad these days. If this was like maybe the early 2010s or mid 2010s, that was pretty good. 75%, that's pretty awesome. But these days, on a task that's just 5 labels, 75% is pretty bad, especially for computer vision. Computer vision is basically considered a solved problem, especially image classification, which is the task we're doing. So does anyone have any questions about the code before I continue? So this is a high-level overview of the code. There are some comments above, and if you have any other deeper questions, like maybe you want to run this code for yourself and you want to know how to do it, or if you want to know what some of these features are, we can go over it in the AI UCF Discord in the troubleshooting and help channel. But if you have any questions now, I'm happy to answer them. So the decorators here, it's essentially like adding a callback. So I know in TensorFlow, Oh, this is probably not helpful. I probably shouldn't answer it that way. Essentially what the decorator, if anyone's unfamiliar with decorators, it's basically like it adds extra functionality to a function. So you have this function, it defines this code, and maybe you want to do something more with that function. Python has this concept of decorators that basically lets you do more things with it. And decorators can do a wide variety of things. In this specific use case, what we're saying is whenever the model completes an epoch, so whenever it's done, it finishes one training cycle, we want it to run this code. You can also, decorators can also be like, I know TensorFlow had like one for returning a certain value type. So in TensorFlow, if you had a function that did 1 + 1, and you want it to return like an array instead of like a single integer, you can that's a bad example, but you can add a decorator to do that. So there's a bunch of things decorators can do. And if you notice here, we're printing like the metrics. That's what it does here. It's logging the epoch to the screen. So yeah, this is a decorator, this little @ symbol. Yeah. Like when an epoch is done, we also save it. So it's really cool. It's a much cleaner way of doing it. Normally you add it like a callback, like TensorFlow lets you do like callbacks. And then you add all the functions there. And if you don't know what a callback is, it's essentially like, it's a function you call after you finish doing something else. So after I run a marathon, my function is drink water and relax. That's my callback. So I don't run marathons, by the way. It's a lie of an example. So we're going to jump into, I'm going to pull up my VS Code. And we're going to jump into, oh, no, this is the wrong code. Let me open up the right folder. That was another project I was working on. I'm going to have to change those secrets. I just put production secrets onto the screen right there. I'm going to have to change those after this. So let me go ahead and pull up the workshop code. I'm waiting for VS Code to open. I promise you're not dilly-dallying around. VS Code is currently frozen. That's cool. While the VS Code opens, I can look at the code through GitHub because I already uploaded the code. And if you don't have the GitHub repo, I think some people joined late. I'll go ahead and drop it in here. And if you want the slides, I'll go ahead and drop those as well in case you want to review something. Cool. Well, my computer screams to get VS Code up and running. We'll just go ahead and look at the code right here. So we're using Flask, which, like I mentioned earlier, Flask is just a web framework for Python that lets you write APIs and deploy code. So Drew, I think you're unmuted if you want to. Yeah, thanks. So, yep. So basically what we're doing here with Flask is I saved my model is wildlife model.pt is just the file format for saving PyTorch models. This .eval in PyTorch, it turns off like autograd and it turns off like all the training functions. So it means like, hey, I'm going to use this model to actually evaluate like data. I don't need you to train the model right now. I'm just using it to actually. It does some other stuff too. If you want to read the documentation, go ahead. So index to names.json. What this is doing is, oops, no, that's a binary file. So this is. When VS Code comes back up, that'd be much nicer. But the model, when I give it a photo of an African elephant, it's not going to tell me it's an African elephant. It's going to give me like a number of like 0 through 1 or 0 through 4, not 0 through 1. And then I need to translate that into a readable answer for the human. So that's what this does. You can ignore what this is. This was just in the, when I was making this example, this was just left over in there. But let's say 0 is African elephant, 1 is a leopard, 2 is a fox, etc. Chimpanzee and orangutan. So we're just going to load that into Python. So, and this is just like a fancy null check to make sure the file is there. So if you're used to null checking from Intro to C or CS1. So why do we need this here? I think I mentioned it earlier, but why? So this is going to be whenever we get the image for the model, we pass it over to this, and you'll see down later in the code we transform the image when we get it. So why do we need this right here? Someone want to answer? You're on the right. You basically got the answer, Tyler. So the reason why we have this transform here is because when we were training our model, and this is something you'll learn with training neural networks, is they're very picky about how the data looks and the shape of the data. I know. So Tyler, I think you mentioned in the chat recently in the Discord that you are still new to this and everything. So as you learn when you train deep learning models, they're very picky, and you'll get a lot of errors if like the shapes of things mismatch. Since when we were training the model, we trained the model on images that were size 256 by 256. When we are going to predict something, we need to make sure the image is the same size it was trained on. If it's not, the model's going to error out. Like, hey, you're giving me an image that's bigger than what I asked for. What the heck? I can only look at images that are 256 by 256. There's ways to get around this. Like there's techniques, you can train the images on different sizes. It's uncommon. Normally you just always make sure your input is the same size across development and across production when you're deploying the model. So this is why we have this here, and we make sure the transformations are the same as what we did here. So that's an important thing to consider whenever you're making your model. Make sure you always the image is always the same, and you can save yourself a lot of headache. So we're going to go down here. So here we're going to see decorators again. This idea of decorators. What do people think this decorator is doing here for Flask? If you already know the answer, don't say it, because I know some people here might have already used Flask before. But we have a function called predict, which is our little API endpoint. What is this decorator doing here? Yep. So Brent got it. It's the route. So whenever, like if you go to a website, let's say if I'm going to go to the house section, that's a bad example because it's not actually telling me. Make a direct transfer. I'm not going to, I feel bad. I'm not going to donate right now. But if you go to a different part of a website, it tells you like it has this little route up here. So this is the host of the website and this is the route. So that's the donate route. That's essentially what you're doing with our code is this is the prediction endpoint. So like this is the home page. When you have nothing there, that's the home page. And then this is the prediction endpoint. And if you don't know what a post method is and everything, don't worry about that. That is covered in, I think, processes of software, what's often called POOP at UCF. If the POOP course covers what post and get methods are and everything. So if you want to know more about web development, luckily that course covers it. So. Yep, this is a predict endpoint. And basically what we're saying is whenever somebody goes to this endpoint, use this function. So that's what a decorator is doing there. Whenever someone goes to this endpoint on your API, we're going to use this function. And what this function is doing is it's when we send our request, we're going to tell it a file. We're going to send it over with a file. It's going to grab that file. If the file is null, so if the file is not null, it's going to do all this. If the file is null, and nothing happens. So this is important null checking. If you've ever taken Dr. Zelansky for any of your courses, you'll know how much he stresses the importance of null checking. And you don't stop it after Intro to C or CS1. You keep it going. So you're going to keep null checking throughout your entire career because oftentimes the data you might get might be null. And it's going to be, if you solve the problems before they happen, makes your life a lot easier. So we're going to transform the image and then we're going to pass it over to the model. So what this does, it's model.forward. It just means it passes the data over. We're going to get the output with the maximum probability. So whenever a model makes a prediction, it might be like, I'm 90% certain this is orangutan, but I'm 10% certain this might be a chimpanzee. We just want to get the orangutan. We don't care about the others. And so we're just going to make it into an integer value. There's comments right here that are really helpful. And then we're just going to return JSON. So that's all that is. There's not really a lot of magic here. It's a really simple example, just under 80 lines of code. If you want to know more, this is where I got the example from. I just modified it so I can use it with my model, but the PyTorch documentation is where I found this from. Whenever you're picking up a new language or a framework, always look at the documentation. Oftentimes the documentation has a lot of examples that you can use. I haven't touched PyTorch in almost a whole year. I'd forgotten how to use with it a lot. And I know for this workshop, I wanted to use PyTorch because it's what the club uses. And so I just looked at the documentation and I got myself up to speed real quick with it. So always use the documentation. It's really big help. So we have this code. We trained our model. We trained it off screen. Didn't train it now, or else it'd take hours. This took like a few hours to train. So we have our little API written. VS Code is still not opening up for me. Sorry about that. Much else exciting. But I'm going to go ahead and we're going to run the app. So I'm going to change the workshops. I want to change the AI UCF. And I think the command is, I closed it by accident. I accidentally put the shortcut to close it. If you are wondering what I'm using Windows Terminal, and I'm using Windows Subsystem for Linux. Windows Terminal you should be using Windows Terminal if you have Windows. It's a great terminal. It's awesome. So I'm going to run the code. It's app.py flask run. So hopefully this works. I tested it last night, so I think it should be working. Oh no! It's broken. Let me make sure I have Flask installed here, because sometimes I use a bunch of virtual environments, so I might not have Flask and Torch installed. The demo gods have not done me well. So live bug fixing. That's weird. Did I not do this right? Making sure my branch is up to date. Cool. Now it's working. Didn't know what error was before. That's weird. Okay. So we have our server running. Now here's the fun part. Do any of you want to post an image in the chat of one of these animals? So let's find, you could probably pick a hard one, the leopard, maybe a different type of leopard. So if you want to find one of these images and paste it in the chat, I'm going to run the model against it, see how it does. Cool. Thanks, Nick. So this is a gorilla. Okay, this is good. So it's a JPEG. Let's see what it calls a gorilla. If you give it something that it was not trained on, it's definitely going to mischaracterize it. Okay, Harambe. Okay. JPEG. Okay, thanks you, Tyler. Ooh, this is a good one. So how can I save this? I wonder if it can do web.p. Oh, that's going to be interesting. So this is not a JPEG, even though the file it's giving me a JPEG. I don't know why it's not saving it as one. Interesting. I'm going to try it anyways because I want to see if it can do a web bitmap file. I think that's a web, or I think that's a web PNG file. No. So. Okay. Thank you. I think we have some fun ones here. All right. So I'm going to open up. We'll have the Fox open in the background. So I'm going to hit the thing locally. I think I need to curl. I think you can. Did I leave the test? I did not write the testing command in here. So there's a testing command we have to use. Since it's documentation, I gotta curl the endpoint. So let's put that Fox back on the screen. So we're going to use, oh, before I do this, actually, let me, learning how to use your terminal is a very good skill. So you should definitely learn how to use it if you don't already. If you've been intimidated by it, it can be very scary, but it's very much worth it. So those gorillas are not JPEGs. I thought they were, so I hope they work. But this will be fun. This will be interesting to see if it can handle different file formats. Okay, it's an orangutan. So let's see what Harambe is according to our model. Also an orangutan. That's interesting. I thought I would have guessed chimpanzee. Let's see. For our, does it say up there? I don't see it there. Huh. Oh yeah, okay, there's the leopard. For the leopard, what do y'all think it's going to classify it as? So we have 5 different classes: elephant, leopard, fox, chimpanzee, and orangutan. My guess is chimpanzee. I feel like it's going to call it a chimpanzee, but maybe I'll be smart. Maybe my model's better than I thought. So what do y'all think that it's going to guess before I click send? Elephant's a good one. Yeah, it might get it wrong. I can see elephant. Yeah, it's also in like a grassy setting. So this is a good exercise when you're working with your data, and if your model's not performing as well as you thought, ideally you want to plot like its confusion matrix. So you want to plot like what is it misclassifying? Like is it calling a bunch of leopards, elephants, stuff like that? But yeah, this is, so let's see. Oh, you're right, an elephant. Nice. So it is going to be an elephant. If we go back to the image you sent, you could see that it's like kind of like in a field-ish setting. Like the model's not going to know that there's rocks and everything here. It is also similar colors, like you said, like a leopard normally does not. This is a black leopard specifically. So good example that you use. Let's go ahead and use the fox one. I think you'll get the fox because it's white, and I don't think any of the other animals were in white settings. So the model probably learned whenever something's really white, it's the fox, the Arctic fox. Yep, the fox. So cool. Thank you everybody for the examples you gave. Appreciate it. So what we're doing here is we're just using a Unix command to send a post request. So that's all it is. You can also use a tool like Postman for your APIs, for testing your APIs and stuff like that. So that covers most of the code portion of the workshop. So this workshop was to give you an introduction to the field of AI and wildlife. It's getting a little bit late. I know some people had to leave at 7, so I want to go ahead and wrap things up so y'all can get like some of the cool stuff at the end. So if you thought any of this was cool, you liked it, and you're like, hey, Anthony, I want to do more with it. I hope you do. Like, I hope you found this stuff interesting. If you do, I have some cool stuff for you. So I'm going to drop these links in the Discord right after we're done. But if you want to do this as a job, if you're still in school and you're not going to graduate for a few more semesters, you want to do this in an internship, or if you want to get some research experience in this field, there's a lot you can do. There's climateaction.tech. It's an awesome community. You want to join their Slack. They often post about job opportunities. If you join their newsletter, they also share job opportunities and internship opportunities as they come. And there's a lot of awesome people within the Slack channel discussing how we as technologists can help fight the climate crisis, a bunch of different jobs you can do as well. Also volunteer positions if you want to work for Microsoft or Amazon or another big company, but you still want to do some climate related stuff on the side. Climate Change AI is the same exact thing. They have forums. It's also really helpful. The project Climate Mind, which I'm going to give it a shout out right now, because I do think it's an awesome team I'm working with. I found it through Climate Change AI. And and here I am. I'm here at the bottom. There's me. So I found it through Climate Change AI. I think they're a great group, not just Climate Change AI, but also Climate Mind, people I work with. Earthshot Labs is another. It's a smaller group of technology enthusiasts who are also solving very specific problems. A lot of cool, awesome, smart people in that one as well. If you like this stuff, but you want to stay close to UCF, you don't want to join all these weird communities, you're like, Anthony, I don't like that. I like to stay local. Totally get it, man. You want to shop local. UCF Biology Labs, they can always use someone with tech skills to join their labs. They're always needing someone with tech talent. You can join as a research assistant, whether paid or unpaid, stuff like that. If you care a lot about wildlife and you're like, okay, so how does this matter in protecting them? What are some other examples? Using the data we collect. So machine learning is often powered by data, but machine learning can also help you collect more data. Stuff like the wildlife traps and tracking population numbers. You can use this to support policy. So stuff like the Endangered Species Act, whenever an animal is listed as endangered or not endangered, we need to know their numbers to make that a decision. Do we need to protect more habitat for the animal? Can we open up fishing permits again for this animal or for this type of fish? So we need data to support policy around wildlife. This is another area you can work. So let's say, Anthony, I don't want to join any of these communities. I have a project idea. Awesome, that's great. You can apply for AI for Earth grants. So you'll get Microsoft will give you Azure credit. I'm not like sponsoring this or anything. I just happen to work for Microsoft, but I knew about AI for Earth prior to this. You could do hackathons. There's a lot of awesome hackathons happening this year. Hackathons are a great way to get more college experience and more project experience. We have project teams. So this workshop was done through AI at UCF, the project teams portion. If you want to do a project, pitch a project to Nick or one of the other coordinators. I'm sure they'll happy to have more people, or join one of the existing ones. I know we have a lot of awesome existing projects too. So, or you can pitch a project to a lab. So that's roughly everything. If you want to work with more of the data, I also included some more data sets for image classification and everything here. So yeah, thank you so much for coming out. I do appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who came. We're sorry we start the meeting so late. Sometimes things like this happen. So thanks for still making it despite that. So I'll go ahead and stop sharing. Thanks, everybody. If you have any other questions,